Hello and welcome to Lily de Silva Lesson 9. The grammar in this lesson is going to take rather longer than the grammar in the other lessons. There's quite a bit more in it. And also it's a lot more interesting. We now start making complex sentences. So in this video we'll just do the grammar and then I'll do the translation exercises, English to Pali and Pali to English in separate videos. In this lesson, we're dealing with what is variously known as the gerund, or the absolutive, or the indeclinable participle. They will mean the same thing. Modern grammarians tend to use the word absolutive, so that's the word that we will use. And just the form basically means where you describe a sequence of events with the same person doing the thing. And means having done so-and-so, having done so-and-so, then the main verb. So it's where you get a sequence of events with the same subject. You use the absolutive for the earlier verbs in that string, often just one verb. It can be a whole string of verbs. Did A, then did B, then did C. All these can be in what's known as the absolutive form, then followed by the main verb. So let's now look at the forms of these things. Let me share my screen with you. So it's formed, basic rule, you form an absolutive by adding the suffix toi. So the suffix toi is either added directly to the root, or there can be an intervening I. So often you'll find it's itwa. It's called the connecting I. Sometimes the root remains completely unchanged. Sometimes it's changed slightly for euphony. And we'll see these as we go along. So look at pach. Pachitva. So in Sanskrit, the root is pach, the Vedic root. It's pachitva, having cooked. By the way, that word is cognate with our English word bake, pach, bake. We have kaditva. Oops, sorry. So kad, to eat, and kaditva. Now gum. When we add the twa, the M changes to an N euphonically, because it's easier to say gantwa with an N rather than gantwa. So we have gantwa, having gone. Han, to kill, is unchanged. Han, hantwa, having killed. Now the book goes on to say the suffix ya is sometimes added to roots with a prefix. So for example, gum, to go, Sanskrit root gum, to go, gantva, having gone, but with a prefix agam, it becomes agamma or agamya, then which the mya then becomes agamma. And the examples also given, just follow this on your printed page. So da, to give, ada, to take, adaya, having taken, ruh, to climb, aruh, to climb up. So aruhya becomes aruiha, and avaruhya, that's to descend. Avaruhya becomes oruiha. In Sanskrit, it would still be avaruhya. Now, the book says the suffix ya is sometimes added to roots with a prefix. What I'll do now is to explain the rule in Sanskrit, and as in so many things, what happens in Sanskrit makes it far, far easier to then understand and remember what happens in Pali and why it happens in Pali. The rule in Sanskrit is this, that twa, as an absolutive, having done so and so, is added to a pure root, that is a root without a prefix. So look at the root gum, to go, and in Sanskrit that becomes gantwa. As we've seen, just change the m to a n before a t, which is normal euphonic change, gantwa. Now, if we put a verbal prefix in front of that root, agam, meaning to come, under the Sanskrit rules, you cannot add the ending tva to a root if that root has a verbal prefix in front of it. So gum, gantwa, han, hantwa, and so on, correct. But with agam, you've got to add a ya, not a twa. So in Sanskrit, it becomes agamya, having come. Now just make all this red to emphasize that this is Sanskrit. In Pali, that rule doesn't actually apply. And that is why you can very often have two alternative forms. So if you look down at, it says attention may be paid to the following forms. I'm going to look at the second one first. That's agachati. Agachati, agam, he, she, it comes, agachati. In Pali, you can have agantva, which would not be allowed in Sanskrit, because you cannot have the twa ending if there is a verbal prefix a. So in Sanskrit, it has to be agamya. Agantva is actually wrong in Sanskrit, though it is allowed in Pali. The Pali allows both forms, agantva, and the Sanskrit agamya, of course, as normal, becomes agamma, with the Sanskrit mya changing to a double M in Pali, the consonant cluster agamya, agamma. So both of these forms are correct in Pali. Now if we look at the first verb under number 2, bhunjati, bhunjati, sorry, bhunjati is bhunjitva or bhutva. In some verbs, the e is inserted. There's a twa, itwa, if you look where I'm underlining here, twa or itwa. The rules for when that e is inserted, that's the rules in Sanskrit, are quite complex. That's the bad news. The good news is that you don't need to remember the rule at all, because if you'll be reading, and so if you see it there, it's there. If it's not there, it's not there. It doesn't really matter if you particularly want to learn the rules, and of course go to a standard Sanskrit grammar to learn them. but it's completely unnecessary. In fact, if your purpose, even with Sanskrit, if your purpose is just to read Sanskrit, you don't need to memorize the complex rules about when the I goes in. If you just see it, it's there. In Pali, as so often happens, the rules don't apply in quite that rigid way. As originally just a colloquial spoken language, the grammar is a lot more fluid than in Pali. So, for example, if you look at the third one along, Hanati, from the root Han, Vedic root Han, you have Hantwa, which is the standard formation, but Pali will allow you to insert that I there to make Hanitwa. Now, in Sanskrit, only one form would be allowed. In fact, in Sanskrit, the N drops out, so it becomes actually Hatwa, having killed. I'll make this, oops, sorry. I will make this. Another aspect in which Pali is more lax in its rules of formation is that in Sanskrit, the absolutive endings twa and ya are added directly to the root, with or without slight phonetic modifications. In Pali, they can be added to the root, or in some cases to the root and to the present stem. So look at the fourth verb down under section 2, dadati. So we have the root da, and it's a reduplicating verb, so it makes its present tense dadati, not dati, but dadati, as in star Sanskrit, tishtati Sanskrit, tishtati. The root ha, to abandon, not hati, but jahati in both Sanskrit and Pali, jahati. In Sanskrit, the absolutive with the root without a prefix is done by just putting twa onto the end of the root. In fact, da is slightly irregular because Sanskrit doesn't have datwa but datwa. Datwa. That's Sanskrit. Pali has two alternative forms. One is datwa, which is closer to the Sanskrit. But you see from the book here, it also has daditwa. In other words, it is forming its absolutive from the present stem, not from the root da, but from the present stem dadati, daditwa. Both correct in Pali, and note that this is a form that would not be permitted in Sanskrit. The same with the next one, nahayati. The Sanskrit root actually is sna, that becomes naha, meaning to bathe. So in Sanskrit, having bathed is simply quite regular snatva, having bathed. In Pali, you can form it in two ways. So he bathes, that is nahayati. In Pali, you can do it from the straight onto the root, as in Sanskrit. So instead of sna, it becomes naha. So nahatva. Or you can make the absolutive from the present stem as well. So nahayati, nahayitva. Again, the nahayitva, snayitva form in Sanskrit would be wrong, and doesn't exist. Now look over to page 9. Tittati tatva. Okay, so we have in our root sta. you would expect to see sthatva, but it's slightly irregular. In Sanskrit, even the a becomes an I. So just as stood, the past participle stood becomes stita, so the absolutive is stitva. Stitva. And that is reflected in the Pali in tatva. Now look at the next one, nikkamati. Looking at the second line now on page 33. So this is our root kram, meaning to step. With the prefix nish, means to step, literally to step out, to step away. It also means just to leave or depart from something. So nishkram. In Sanskrit, there's only one correct way of forming the absolutive, because we have this verbal prefix nish in front of the root. Therefore, it can't have a twa, it has to be a ya. So we get in Sanskrit nishkramya. Nishkramya. In Pali, you're allowed to do both. So that is why we have so the nishkram becomes nikkam, usual phonetic mutation, Sanskrit to Pali. So with the inserted I, so nikkamitva, or a form that exactly mirrors the Sanskrit, nishkramya becomes nikkamma in Pali. And as we now know, the form nikkamitva or nishkrantva or nishkramitva would not be allowed in Sanskrit, because you can't have the twa if the root has a verbal prefix in front of it. Now look at the next one, pajahati. Root ha, it's a reduplicating verb, so the present is jahati. Jahati, same in Sanskrit and Pali. It's far more common to see this verb with a pra in front of it, meaning to leave or to abandon. It's the verb that's often used for abandoning bad things, bad qualities, bad behavior. So praha and Pali paha. Now, in Pali, sorry, look in Sanskrit first. Praha forms its absolutive in the normal way. There is a verbal prefix, therefore you can't have twa at the end. You just add the ya. So in Sanskrit, prahaya. Pali has two permissible forms. One of them exactly mirrors the Sanskrit, the pra of Sanskrit becoming pa of Pali in the normal way, so pahaya. But Pali is also allowed to form its absolutive with a twa on the present stem. So instead of pahaya, which is allowed, they can take the present stem, pajahati, the present verb, pajahati, and then form the absolutive from that. Pajahitva, which would, to the Sanskrit grammarian, be doubly wrong. Doubly wrong, firstly, because you do not make an absolutive off the present stem, you take it off the root. So prahaya, not prajahitva. So that's one reason. And the other reason, of course, as I've now said several times, because you want, in Sanskrit, you aren't allowed to have the twa ending if there is a verbal prefix. Pali, it's okay. And we'll now look at the the last one in that list at the top of the page, uttahati. Again, it's from our root sta. And the ut, meaning, it's actually cognate with our English word up, but it often has the meaning not only up, but out and up. Often with that same meaning. Paticca samuppada, utpada. It's arising, the idea of coming out of something and up, so to arise. So utta means to get up. So ut, and in Sanskrit, I think this is the only verb that does it. It loses its s after the prefix ut. So in Sanskrit, it is utta. But the present, remember, sta becomes tishtati, put the ut in front of that, and the s comes back. So ut tishtati, ut tishtati. In Sanskrit, so utta makes its absolutive regularly, uttaya. And in Pali, that's the Sanskrit, it reflects the Sanskrit, but it has the T retroflex, and this now reflects the uttishtati, which in Pali becomes uttittati. Let's write that for you. Uttittati. And I'm just going to ring the purely Sanskrit bits and make those red. There we are. But notice that the Pali can also, by the way, Pali also allows, uttahati. The Pali also allows itself to make its absolutive from the present stem. That's why in Pali you can have uttahitva. Again, that would be doubly wrong in Sanskrit. Firstly, because the twa, you can't have the twa if there's a verbal prefix, the ut. And secondly, wrong because you can't form your absolutive from the present stem. It has to be done off the base. So there's an utta, uttaya in Sanskrit. And we'll now look at this passati. That's the fourth line on page 33. Passati passitva. Now, as we know, the Sanskrit root drish it is irregular and unusual because it makes its present stem with pashya. There are very, very few verbs that do that. So he sees is pashyati. We have it in English very rarely. For example, go, the past tense of go isn't goed, it's went, where we use a completely different verb to make our past tense. This is just a phenomenon that occurs rarely, but this is one very common verb that does it in Sanskrit. Now the Sanskrit and pashyati becomes as soups. Passati, pashyati Sanskrit, passati Pali, vipassana insight. The absolutive form in Sanskrit is formed regularly with the ending twa. Note, before a twa, or before any t actually, a sh becomes sh if it's followed by a t. Note that rule. So drish becomes drishtva. Drishtva means having seen. And this is a regular formation in Sanskrit. In Pali, you can have two forms, three actually. So drishtva is reflected in the Pali, disva, but Pali will also allow itself to do what would be regarded as totally wrong in Sanskrit, is making the absolutive off the present base. So just as you have passati, so Pali allows, but Sanskrit wouldn't, passitva. Disva is actually far more common than passitva. Disva, incidentally, the ending, you also see disvana. Many endings in twa, you can see twa or twana. No difference of meaning. Twana reflects an ancient Vedic form that is not fell out of use and is not in use in classical Sanskrit, but was in use in Vedic and like many forms. That's one of the reasons actually that Pali grammar can be slightly more complex in some ways than Sanskrit with alternative forms, because these ancient Vedic forms that were excluded from classical Sanskrit remain in use in Pali. Now, let's have a look at section 3 here, examples in sentence formation. Now, it's often said in the grammars that this absolutive in twa means having done so and so, then he did so and so. Firstly, remember that if you're going to use an absolutive, it's got to be the same subject for both the absolutive verb, so the subject is the same as the main verb. So, for example, I got home and I received a telephone call. So in Sanskrit Pali, having got home, I received a telephone call. A bit like in English, because then you can't say, I having got home, my friend telephoned me. You can, I having got home, my friend telephoned me. In Sanskrit and Pali, you can't do that. You have to say, I got home, use a finite verb, he telephoned me. And then, I got home, having got home, I had dinner. But you can't say, for example, having got home, somebody gave me dinner. If the me having got home and somebody else giving me dinner are two different people, you have to use you can't use the absolutive in Sanskrit and Pali there. It's got to be the same person throughout. And the string of verbs can be, in theory, unlimited. You can have any number of verbs in the absolutive, a sequence of verbs, provided it's the same subject, provided it's the same person is the subject of all of those verbs. So that shows the absolutive as showing a sequence of events. A happened, then B happened, then C happened, and so on. And that's how it's given in these 4 examples, which I'll go through. That's the 4 examples in section 3 on page 33. So kassako kettama agantva battam bhunjati. The farmer, kassako kettamha agantva, having come from the field, battam bhunjati, eats rice. Number 2, vanara rukkam aruyha palani khadanti. So the monkeys, having climbed the tree, rukkam aruyha, eat fruits, palani khadanti. Number 3, darako battam yachitva rodati. The child, having begged for rice, cries or weeps. Number 4, samano buddham pasitva vandati. The recluse, the samano, buddham pasitva, having seen the Buddha. You would equally correctly say buddham disva or buddham disvana, buddham pasitva vandati. Now, note that in all of these 4 sentences, it's translated as having come, having climbed, having asked, having seen. In English, it would be more normal for us just to use 2 finite verbs. For example, number 1, the farmer came from the field and ate rice. Number 2, the monkeys climbed the tree and ate the fruits. Number 3, the child begged for rice and then cried. Number 4, the recluse saw the Buddha and then paid homage to him. It's more normal for us in English, and it's not wrong to say having done so and so, but it's more normal to use a series of finite verbs. Whereas in Sanskrit and Pali, it is, again, not absolutely wrong to use a series of finite verbs, but it's far more natural in Sanskrit and Pali, if it's the same person doing it, to use the absolutives, the twa or the ya ending, and then just have one finite verb at the end. Now, this lesson suggests that the absolutive is used for a sequence of events. A happened and then B happened. It's very often used for concurrent events or adverbially. Now, I'll give you an entire separate lesson on how it's used, but just to alert you here, let me share the screen from this is the Dhammapada, it's the Puppavaggo, it's 4.4. Let me just enlarge it for you. You see, Suttam Gamam Hoghova Machu Adaya Gachati. This is an Adaya. Adaya. Let me just go back to my shared screen now. So Machu Adaya Gachati. Machu in Sanskrit, Mrityu. Death, Mrityu, or Machu Gachati, literally death goes. Adaya, the root da, to take, sorry, to give. Ada, to take. Adaya, same as Sanskrit and Pali, literally having taken. But in this sentence, Machu Adaya Gachati, let me go back to my other screen. So Machu highlighted, death, Gachati, goes. It looks as if it means death, Machu Adaya, having taken, goes. It doesn't mean that. Adaya here describes a concurrent activity. So death goes taking people. He's taking people. Death is taking people as it goes along. So here it's not a sequence of events. It's a concurrent event, and it's almost an adverbial use of it. How is he going, or what is he doing as he goes along? So concurrent event. And that is a very, very frequent use of it. So just because you see something that looks like an absolutive, don't fall into the trap of thinking it's a sequence of events. And it's also used in a quasi-prepositional form. I won't go into this in detail. This grammar video has got long enough already. But just to alert you that just as you have the adaya, as in this form that we've seen, we also have, let me now bring my shared screen back. For example, let's just take the, I won't go into this in detail, just to alert you. Root shri, to lie, ashri, literally to lie on, but then it means to rely on. Ashritya. I'm doing this bit in Sanskrit, but exactly the same principles apply. Let me just make this red for you. We're dealing with Sanskrit here. So ashritya, sorry. Ashritya then looks like ashritya. By the way, there's an inserted t there. I won't bother with that. Why? But it's the absolutive. Ashritya, having relied on. So you see, having relied on the strength of his allies' army, he won the war. And Rama, relying on the monkey in the Ramayana, having relied, ashritya. Ashritya, having relied on, having placed reliance on, his friendly forces, then invaded Sri Lanka and seized Sita back. So this ashritya, it doesn't mean that he placed reliance on them, event number 1, and having done that, proceeded to event number 2. It means over the entire process, that reliance continued. So having placed reliance on doesn't have a temporal force. It's a continuing thing. As I say, I will do this in greater detail as we go along, but just bear in mind that the absolutive is for, sorry about that, a call came in just as I was coming to the end, so I slightly lost my thread. Anyway, I think we were coming to the end. As I say, this bit about the absolutive representing concurrent events, or as in ashritya, a quasi-prepositional use, we will deal with in detail another time. This is just to alert you that the absolutive is not just a sequence of events, it has other uses as well. Good, that is it for this video.